So, ever wonder how economists really think about the government's role in our lives? Today, we're going to break down the four big questions they ask. This whole framework comes straight from an intro lecture at MIT, and it's basically a toolkit that'll help you understand some of the biggest, messiest policy debates happening right now. Let's get into it.
And there's really no better place to start than with this quote from that lecture. Think about it. COVID-19 wasn't just a health crisis, was it? It was a massive, real-time experiment, a huge stress test for governments everywhere. It forced every single country on the planet to ask these gigantic questions about what its job really is.
I mean, just think about the debates that were all over the news, all over our dinner tables. Should vaccinations be mandated? That's a classic clash between personal freedom and public health. Should the government just send checks to everybody? That's all about economic stability. And how long should unemployment benefits last? That's a huge question about the social safety net. See? These are all textbook public finance problems, but they were playing out in real time, on a global stage.
So how do you make sense of all that? How do you cut through the noise and the politics? Well, that's where this simple but really powerful framework comes in. It's these four questions. Think of them as a guide that helps us move past just shouting our opinions and into actually analyzing the problem. So let's walk through them, one by one.
All right, question one. This is the big one, the most fundamental of them all. When should the government even get involved in the first place? I mean, when should it step into the economy at all? This question, it's really the core of that huge ongoing argument between free markets on one side and the need for government intervention on the other.
Okay, so the default setting for most economists, their starting point is this idea with a fancy name, the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. All that really means is that most of the time, the market's invisible hand does a pretty good job of getting things right for society, but, and this is a huge but, that's only when everything is working perfectly. The second things get messy in the real world, well, that's when we get what economists call market failures.
And one of the most common types of market failure is something called a negative externality. The easiest way to think about it is as a spillover cost. It's when something you do creates a cost for someone else, a cost that you don't have to pay. See, you're only thinking about your own personal cost, not the total cost your decision has on everyone.
Okay, let's make this super concrete. Here's a question straight from the lecture that might sound a little strange at first. Why is your decision to buy an SUV a public problem? I mean, it feels like a totally personal choice, right? Your money, your car. Well, an economist would say, not so fast, because that choice creates at least three big negative externalities.
So, first off, the environment. An SUV burns more gas, which means more pollution. That's a cost we all share. Second, wear and tear on our roads. The damage a vehicle does to the pavement actually goes up exponentially with its weight. So a heavy SUV causes way more damage than a small car, creating repair costs that everybody's tax dollars have to cover. And third, and this one's a big one, safety. In a crash, the bigger, heavier vehicle puts people in smaller cars, not to mention pedestrians, at a much, much greater risk. So in all three of these cases, the SUV driver isn't footing the bill for these extra social costs, and that is a market failure. It means we get more SUVs on the road than is probably optimal for society as a whole.
Okay, so let's say we've spotted a market failure. We've answered when the government should intervene. That brings us, logically, to the second question. How should it intervene? I mean, what can the government actually do about it? What's in the toolbox?
Well, it turns out the government has a whole menu of options. First, it can use taxes or subsidies, financial carrots and sticks to nudge our behavior. Or it can get more direct and just restrict or mandate something, like how the Affordable Care Act required people to have health insurance. Option 3, the government can just provide the service itself. Think about how Canada's government provides health insurance directly to its citizens. And finally, number 4, it can use public money to pay private companies to do the job. A great example of this is Medicare Part D in the US, where the government pays private insurers to offer drug plans.
Okay, so you pick a tool from the menu. Simple enough, right? Wrong. This is where things get really tricky, because picking a tool is one thing, but knowing what's actually going to happen when you use it, that's a whole different ballgame. And that brings us to question 3. What are the real effects of these interventions going to be?
See, you have to think about two kinds of effects. You've got the direct effects. That's the easy, straightforward math. If a policy is supposed to help 100 people, we assume it helps 100 people. Simple. But then you have the indirect effects. These are the ripple effects, the unintended consequences that happen because people change their behavior in response to the new policy. And that's the super complicated part. That's what economists really get paid to figure out.
And this chart from the lecture shows exactly why this is so important. Let's say you're rolling out a new public health program.
The direct cost, the simple on-paper calculation, might be $125 billion. That's the first bar. But then you have to account for the indirect effects. What if a bunch of people who already have private insurance decide to drop it and sign up for the free government plan instead? Well, because of that one behavioral change, the real cost could absolutely balloon to $340 billion, a massive difference.
So you might be wondering who in the US government is actually supposed to figure all this complex stuff out. Well, that job belongs to the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO. They're the official, nonpartisan scorekeepers. Their whole job is to analyze new laws and predict both those direct and indirect effects to tell Congress what the real impact is likely to be. Now, this quote sounds pretty dramatic, I know, the last thing between us and the fall of Rome, but it really gets at how important the CBO's job is. In a super-partisan Washington, they're supposed to be the neutral referees just calling the balls and strikes based on data. And you can usually tell they're doing their job right when politicians from both parties are complaining about their analysis. That's kind of the sign of a good umpire. Okay, so we've got the first three questions down: when to get involved, how to do it, and what the effects might be. But here's the thing. Even if the CBO gives a perfect, crystal-clear analysis, governments don't always pick the most efficient, logical option. And that brings us to our fourth and final question. Why do governments do the things they actually do? This is where we leave pure economics and enter the world of political economy. It tries to solve this giant puzzle. Why do different places facing similar problems come up with totally different answers? Why does Canada do universal health care but the US doesn't? Why are taxes in Sweden so much higher than in America? There's no clean, simple economic answer. The real reasons are messy. They're wrapped up in a country's history, its culture, its politics, the whole shebang. So that's it. That's the framework. When, how, what, and why. These four questions give you a complete way to think through almost any government policy. You can spot the problem, look at the options, think about the consequences, and finally understand the political reasons behind the final decision. And this isn't just a tool for economists. It's for anyone who wants to cut through the noise and really understand what's going on in the world.
And that brings me to one last big idea to leave you with. This whole framework helps us figure out when a government should step in. But that raises another question, doesn't it? Just because the market fails, does that automatically mean government is the only answer? What about other solutions? Could private charities or local communities or new technologies solve some of these problems even better? That's a great question to think about. Thanks for joining.